More than 500 Albertans have been issued cease-and-desist letters for accessing a database that revealed the private, personal information of millions of voters in that province. 2.9 million people were affected by this data breach. That means anyone in Alberta who has cast a ballot or is even just registered to vote. Personal data, such as names, addresses, and contact information, were leaked online. The database was built by Alberta Separatist group, the Centurion Project, and they presented the database at an online meeting last month, allegedly using former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's personal information as an example of how to navigate the system. And former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney joins me now. Jason Kenney, it's good to see you again, sir. Thanks for coming here. What was your reaction when you heard that your personal information, your home address, had all been put on a screen at a meeting of Alberta Separatists?
Well, I was a little ticked off. I'm not the kind of person that walks around in fear, but knowing the crowd that would have seen that information and circulated it was concerning because, you know, in that particular organization, that organization started as an anti-vax movement originally before it turned into a kind of hard-right omni-cause group, and now Alberta Separatism. And I know out of that ecosystem, I have received no shortage of very weird threats over the past few years. And I mean, some of those folks, and they say, you can just check out my social media feed, you'll see it at any given hour of the day. I am an evil member of the globalist elites who is going to be executed following the Nuremberg trials for my crimes against humanity, for supporting the vaccines.
Yeah.
And so, you know what? Most of those people are just over-caffeinated, and that's how, I guess, everyone needs a hobby. So a lot of it I don't take too seriously. But it just takes one person who really believes that and acts it, and we've seen this in other countries. So I do take that seriously. I'm taking some prudent steps in terms of personal security. But I'm also concerned about like 3 million Albertans whose personal information was released. What about the women who are victims of domestic violence, whose aggressors can now much more easily get access to where they live, where they're at, journalists or others. So this is a huge data breach, which I think needs to be taken very seriously. I'm glad the RCMP is investigating it, and I'm looking at my own civil legal opportunities here.
Yeah, look, I've had the Nuremberg threat that I'm going to be hung, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
I got a firing squad, but...
well, there you go. Well, you know, you're a former premier. I guess you're worth a bullet. But, you know, the legal options you're looking at here, litigation. I mean, David Parker, you know, for Take Back Alberta, a well-known figure in Alberta politics, I would say. It's not a coincidence, I don't think, that your name and information was put up. So what legal options are you looking at here?
Well, I've had initial consults with lawyers who are looking at whether I have reasonable prospects of success in a civil action for this violation of my privacy and all that it implies. I will be incurring security costs and et cetera. But you're absolutely right. There's no doubt they chose my name very deliberately. And to share my personal information with that particular crowd, I think almost constitutes a kind of incitement.
Look, the way they got this, what's been reported, that it was legally given, the voters list, to the Republican Party of Alberta, and then illegally given to the Centurion group that Mr. Parker leads. There were reports that Elections Alberta was tipped off by Jen Gerson, a journalist with The Line, but they felt because of the changes to the Elections Act made last year, it didn't meet the threshold that they needed to do an investigation. Are you just worried about the legal framework all of this is operating under? Because if Elections Alberta feels they didn't have the right to investigate because of legislative changes last year, is that not a problem?
Well, I don't, look, I can't pretend to know the law on this in a very nuanced way, but I can tell you, as a federal minister for 10 years and as a premier, I constantly run into government agencies and departments and bureaucracies telling us we couldn't walk because of potential violations of the Privacy Act. I mean, if you called me as a journalist when I was Minister of Immigration to ask about some foreign criminal who was pending deportation, we'd have to say, sorry, no comment, Privacy Act. So the federal and provincial Privacy Acts are extremely robust. And the notion that the Privacy Act would not cover the personal information of 3 million people seems to me, on the face of it, to be completely absurd.
Well, it was revealed and confirmed that a member of the United Conservative Party government caucus staff or whatever was in the meeting when this information was displayed. And Daniel Smith's argument is that this person thought it was legally obtained. Now, this person works in opposition research, apparently. My experience, your experience, they tend to know the nitty-gritty of rules because they're looking for things to catch people on. What is your sense of that? That someone who works for the government was in this meeting, saw this happen, and didn't tell anybody up the chain that it was going on?
Well, I wasn't there. I'm dealing with now secondhand reports on this. I think everybody should have taken this more seriously, starting with Elections Alberta. Look, the Alberta Republican Party, who apparently got this list, is not it's a advocacy front for separation. I don't think it's a real bona fide political party. And so, look, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. But I just think this thing is really putting a spotlight on the kind of tactics we're seeing from the separatist side in Alberta, and they've been able to do too many of these things without consequences. I think it's time for consequences.
What do you make of the way the government of Alberta is approaching this, though? We've seen Thomas Lukaszuk, the former deputy premier, sort of leading a movement to get a stay in Canada referendum on the ballot. But, you know, Premier Smith has people who have signed, apparently, the referendum in her caucus and is okay with it. I mean, do you think there's been enough of a pushback or a championing of Canada from the Premier of Alberta, or do you think they're on board with this?
What I can tell you is that as one of the founders of the United Conservative Party, the primary founder, one of the few absolute red lines I had in the negotiation to create the United Conservative Party, the merger, was my insistence that it include an explicit commitment in its founding bylaws to support a strong Alberta in a united Canada. And it's on that ground that every UCP member of the Legislative Assembly was elected in 2019 and in the last election as a Federalist party. So I think they have an obligation to be true to that. They've also taken an oath, by the way, to be loyal to, through the Crown, implicitly the Canadian constitutional order. I think voters should expect their elected representatives to keep their platform commitments, but also their legal undertakings, their oaths. And look, I think this whole thing is the reality is this. There have been Alberta separatist parties on the ballot, provincially and federally, since roughly 1980. About a dozen of these parties, they've come and gone because they never have any staying power or competent leadership. And they never have any broad public support. On average, they get less than 1% of the vote. Pierre Poilievre had two separatist candidates run against him in the Battle River by-election last year. Between them, they got less than 1% of the vote. The last time separatists contested an election in a significant way was the 2022 federal election at the height of, the 21 election, at the height of Justin Trudeau's unpopularity, when the convoy movement was taking off, and the Maverick Party, then led by perhaps the most credible separatist leader ever, the Honourable Jay Hill, former Harper Whip, they got only 35 candidates out of the 95 in Western Canada. They got 0.02% of the vote, fewer votes than in all of Western Canada. So this has always been a marginal thing. Now, what this process has allowed is these folks to suddenly, dominate the politics of our province, start dividing us in all sorts of consequential and perhaps permanent ways. And now we have what the phenomena is. A lot of frustrated Federalists are saying, look, I'm a proud Canadian at heart, and I know becoming a landlocked state makes no sense. But damn it all, maybe this is my chance to send Ottawa a message and finally get taken seriously about our frustrations.
But I appreciate your point on the founding of the United Conservative Party and that as a Federalist party. But do you think there's a sentiment strain, a separatist sentiment creeping into that party now or taking root at scale in that party?
Look, this is obviously the case. You could see the footage from their last convention, and Mr. Rath, one of the most voluble and volatile separatist leaders, was getting cheered by hundreds or thousands of people. These are folks who, at the time of COVID, through the leadership review against me, they got involved in the process. At that time, their focus was their anger about vaccines and COVID-era restrictions. COVID went away, I went away, Justin Trudeau went away, and they looked for a new cause. They got a sense of power and of moral value out of that whole fight. And now they've folded that into the separatist cause. So what was this very marginal separatist movement has been boosted by the addition of those folks coming out of COVID-era radicalization. And they have, collectively, apparently bought, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of memberships in the governing party. And I'm always very careful not to criticize my successor. I don't think that's fair ball. I would just say at some point, the governing party has got to be clear about the basis on which it was created and on which it won 2 majority mandates, which is support for a united Canada, and cannot, allow people trying to tear the country apart to dominate the agenda within that party. If they want to have their own party, and I think the best thing is for separatists to pursue normal parliamentary politics. Put your name on the ballot. See if you can get elected with a government that has a mandate to hold a referendum and then potentially negotiate terms of separation. Right now, we don't have a government with such a mandate. So I think this is creating enormous division in our Alberta society.
How should the Premier respond to this then? Do you think she is taking the right tack here? Because she is an enormously successful political communicator in Alberta. She has a lot of political skill. She could, I don't know if she's being steered by these currents because her political coalition, as you well know, is a difficult one to hold together. But how do you respond to this when the very future of the country and the province is potentially on the ballot here?
Well, I think the right response of any Canadian leader is to respond with clarity and strength. If any Alberta Premier has an obligation to fight for a stronger province, for the exercise of more autonomy, for the repeal of what we think are, most Albertans think are very damaging federal environmental policies, I think she's doing that with the negotiations with the MOU. I think she's taken an outstretched hand from Prime Minister Carney.
With the separatist forces like David Parker and these people, and and on that very argument, the very question, how should she respond to that in a public way?
Well, look, I think any responsible leader should make it clear that those folks have, if they're committed to tearing the country apart, they don't have a place in a pro-Canada party. And, they have their own separatist parties. Why are they trying to infiltrate a Federalist party? There's one reason, because it's the party in power, and because they can't get elected on a separatist ticket. In 50 years, contesting over 24 federal and provincial elections, in over 1,600 riding elections, they've only ever won one in a by-election in 1982 at the height of the National Energy Program, a seat that they lost 6 months later.
Right.
So I would say, look, folks, you've got a point of view. In a democracy, you can express it. Put it on the ballot and test it. You've been doing that for 50 years and failing, so you don't get to take over a governing party that was elected on a mandate of federalism.
But if they persist on this, buying up memberships and sort of gaining control of maybe riding levels at the provincial level and maybe the federal level, does this run the risk of more fracturing in the conservative movement?
Yeah,
right?
yes.
Like this, because you can see it happening at the federal level.
Yes, I say to the separatists, look, you guys have no realistic prospect of getting your 50%. And even if you do, then we go into endless and I think pointless negotiations that will lead nowhere. Because, by the way, I mean, even if you follow the path of the secession reference of the Supreme Court and the subsequent Clarity Act, ultimately where that leads you to, it goes to negotiations if you have a clear question and a clear majority voting for it. But then you just go into constitutional amendments, which requires, in many cases, unanimity from the Canadian provinces. So the prospect of actual separation is virtually nil. So guess what? In the real world, even if you get your 25% with a lot of frustrated Federalists using it to send a message, who is the biggest political winner of that? The Liberal Party of Canada. There will be a rally around the flag effect for Prime Minister Carney in Alberta, particularly amongst mainstream urban Albertans, much like there was nationally for him in the last federal election. The Liberal Party of Canada is now polling at around 40%. His approval rate, Mr. Carney's approval rate, is 48%. I think a big part of that is Albertans who are ticked off with the separation talk, supporting, who want a strong federal government to protect them from it. That is only going to deepen if these guys go all the way to a divisive vote, and it will split the United Conservative Party in the scenario that you've just described, and potentially elect an NDP government on a conservative split. So the separatists are not actually strengthening Alberta. The knife to the throat metaphor that people use. Quebec's been doing this for 60 years. Why don't we replicate their threat? All you end up doing is electing more Liberal MPs from Alberta, fewer Conservatives who are defending the province's interests in Ottawa, and potentially electing an NDP through a vote split. How does that advantage Alberta's interests in the Federation?
I have one more question. I've gone over time, and I apologize for that. But the last time we had a referendum 30 years ago in Quebec, the mainstream media was not in the full sort of decay and collapse that has happened like at scale. There was no social media to influence things. There was no artificial intelligence. And what people would see on their screens, they knew to be, a reflection of reality or the best efforts of it. Now we have a very different situation where a binary choice can be manipulated in ways that we've seen in Brexit, potentially in the US elections. Do you think Albertans, Canadians are ready for what could be unleashed? Because we've already seen Russia, American, and even Dutch influencers getting involved in this with digital campaigns that are dishonest and designed to fuel separatist.
I was actually at an event in Toronto last night where this paper was presented on initial proof points that you've raised about foreign online interference. I would say it needs to be monitored. It is happening, but I don't think it's certainly not at this point, a decisive influence. Look, David, there are, as you know, there's over a century of legitimate Western grievances, Western alienation, that was accelerated by Justin Trudeau's policies. And those are the things that primarily are driving this, plus just generally this kind of movement from the alt-right that got radicalized during COVID. Some of that is based on information from foreign sources. We got to keep an eye on it. But I wouldn't overstate the impact that is having. The real challenge are traditional Conservative voters who are frustrated Federalists. They single Canada at the hockey games. Half of them moved to Alberta from Newfoundland or somewhere else. They know that becoming a landlocked statelet doesn't work, but they think maybe they can use this to finally get respect from Ottawa. Those are not people following Russian propaganda. We've got to rebut that argument, and the Prime Minister can help us by getting to a positive conclusion on the negotiations over this MOU soon.
Well, I meet with Premier Daniel Smith tomorrow, so we'll see where that goes. Jason Kenney, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in, and good luck with everything in the days ahead.